Hey everyone, this is Pete. Welcome back to Atari A to Z, a series of short playthroughs of Atari 8-bit games, some of which I grew up with and some of which are new to me. Today's game is for the M's. It is Miner 2049'er by Bill Hogue, released by Big 5 Software. This was one that I did play back in the day. It's one of those games that, one of those many games that we had a pirate copy of on our Atari 8-bit. And this was quite an unusual one in Europe because you had to import it in a lot of cases. So it was actually quite an expensive game to get hold of. As you can see there, Big 5 Software happily putting their address on the title screen. And they're based in California. So yeah, this cost a good 30 or 40 quid to get imported from the States back in the day, which I'm sure you can imagine back in 1982 was quite a lot of money. But fortunately this was a very well received game. And this is also a really good example of the kind of typical platform game, or platforms and ladders game as they used to refer to them back in the day. So your aim in this game is to make your way across all of the platforms, and you have to paint all of the stripy platforms into a solid colour. And you do that just by walking over them. The flashing coloured things will kill you if you touch them, but you can jump over them like that. And you can also die if you fall too far. Alright, let's try and be less incompetent. So, picking up an item will turn the enemies into one of these green things in a sort of Pac-Man style-y. And that means that they are then vulnerable to you touching them and defeating them. But after a few seconds they'll go back to the flashing colour version of themselves. And they will once again be dangerous. So you don't have to defeat all of the enemies on each screen to pass the level, nor do you have to collect all of the objects, but you're going to get the most points if you do that. Now this is like I was saying at the beginning, this is a really good example of what a platform game was in the 8-bit computer era. So these days people tend to associate 8-bit platform games with the sort of stuff that you saw on the NES, so sort of side-scrolling platform games along the lines of things like Super Mario Brothers and such like. But before that, we had stuff like this that was a bit more heavily inspired by earlier stuff like Donkey Kong. So you had static levels, normally a series of static levels, that got increasingly complex and challenging to navigate, and some form of objective that tasked you with getting around the level in some way. So some games simply demanded that you sort of get to the top, like in Donkey Kong. Others, like this one, expected you to actually make contact with every point on the level. And as you can see, there's some interesting hazards along the way as well. So you've not just got ladders and platforms. In this one, you've got slides as well. And there's also some other hazards that come into the mix a little bit later on as well. And it's these hazards that are part of the reason that this game was so well received back in the day, because it was so interesting. It provided a little bit more than the bare minimum, if you like. Oh, running short on time. It also had a bit of personality to it as well. So this was sort of marketed as Miner 2049'er starring Bounty Bob, who is the guy down there. He's not a miner, he's a Mountie, if I remember correctly. Hence the silly hat. And okay, well, he's not the best sprite you'll ever see. He is. He has a certain amount of personality to him, and he's an immediately recognisable character, more to the point as well. So that's why he was so well received. Okay, so these things are teleporters. You can stand in one and press a number key on the keyboard to teleport to the respective number. And while they're red, you can't use them. And once they're green, you can use them again. Alright, tricky jump there. Got to make sure we don't accidentally headbutt the thingy there, because he will kill us. Growing up playing this is one of those games I was actually sort of irrationally scared of, just because when you die at the hands of one of the monsters, it's I don't know if I'd call it horrifying, but it's yeah, there we go. That used to scare the shit out of me when I was a kid. Normally because it sort of happens maybe when you don't expect it so much. So like it often occurs while you're trying to make a tricky jump, or as you're trying to defeat them by walking through them and such like. So yeah, it often made me jump. We just got ourselves an extra life there. So the convention at the time was for extra lives to come around 10,000 points. I'm not sure if that came from arcade games or if that was a specifically computer game thing. But yeah, 10,000 was typically the milestone at which you get an extra life. Not sure what that object was. It looked awfully like the female reproductive system, but and yeah, this era of platform game, they had a few things in common. So your levels were usually timed. You usually had fall damage, or more specifically, fall death. So if you fell too far, you would immediately be killed. And so a lot of the mastery of the game was about understanding its physics. So how far you could jump, how high you could jump, how far you could fall as well. There's a lot of levels specifically demand that you fall onto a particular platform. And obviously in order to do that you need to know how far you can drop without getting killed. So that there we can survive, for example. But anything a bit higher than that will probably cause problems. Now we can't jump off ladders either, so actually might be a little bit stuck. Yes, I think we're stuck. So let us sacrifice ourselves with the horrifying animation and sound. And there we have it. Right, so let's get rid of him. Get rid of him. Go straight over here, get rid of that. There we go. So you'll see with the way these games work, rather than just being a straight action game of sorts, they're very much sort of puzzle games almost. In that they're all about working out what the optimal route to get around the level is. And even the enemies are part of that as well. So they're not just there just as hazards. They are specifically there to give you a reason to navigate around the level in a certain direction. Okay, so with all the enemies gone, we have a certain amount of freedom. However, we are still vulnerable to falling. And as you've seen up until now, dying causes you to restart the level as well, so not something you want to do really. And then of course you've got the ticking time limit all the while as well, so right. How do we get that one? Not like that. We die. So you see, you really can't fall very far before you lose it. Alright, so there's a Quite a lot of levels in that game, as I recall. I forget exactly how many, but yeah, there's quite a few to make your way through, and it gets more and more difficult as you go through. There was also a sequel to this game called Bounty Bob Strikes Back that was equally well received. It's very similar to this in execution, but it's got sort of more levels, more different hazards and that sort of thing. So if you enjoyed this one, then Bounty Bob Strikes Back is very much worth checking out as well. So hopefully that's given you a good idea of how Miner 2049'er works. Hope you enjoyed that. I certainly did. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you again next time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please help out the channel by leaving a like or a comment and subscribing. New episodes of Atari A to Z are on Tuesdays and Atari ST A to Z on Thursdays. Check out atariatoz.wordpress.com for a full archive. Do please also check out my other projects moegamer.net, where I explore Japanese and Japanese-inspired games from yesterday and today, and videopackgames.wordpress.com, which aims to catalogue a small but well-formed library of the Philips G7000 Videopack computer, also known as the Magnavox Odyssey 2. You can also support my work on Patreon or buy me a coffee. You can find links to do both down in the video description. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.